I woke to the sound of someone walking in the apartment above mine. Slow, deliberate steps, like they were counting each one, echoing to the thin ceiling until it felt like the floor beneath me was trembling. I had just moved into this building a week ago, tired of the city's endless chaos, seeking silence, a fresh start. But the quiet I found was heavy, oppressive, almost alive. The old brick apartment had a musty smell, a mix of damp wood and faded carpet. And the walls were lined with cracks that seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking. At first, I chalked it up to settling. Now, I wasn't so sure. I live alone, a small one-bedroom on the third floor. My neighbors are barely there. Most are young professionals or students, disappearing during the day and returning late at night, doors slamming in the dark. But these footsteps were different. They didn't sound like anyone hurrying home, drunk or distracted. They sounded patient, deliberate, almost calculating. I tried to ignore it, rolling over and pulling the blanket over my head. But sleep wouldn't come. The steps moved back and forth, pausing above my bed. Then, a soft, dragging scrape, like furniture being pulled across the floor. My throat went dry, my heart pounding in my chest as I stared at the ceiling. The next morning, I mentioned it to the building manager, a wiry man named Harris who smelled faintly of tobacco and oil. "Oh, the old lady upstairs?" he said, dismissing me with a wave of his hand. "She's harmless, likes to move her furniture at odd hours." But something in his eyes didn't match his words. A flicker of concern or fear, I couldn't tell. I went about my days trying to distract myself. Work, coffee, long walks, but the nights were worse. The apartment above me had grown louder, more deliberate. Sometimes it was the footsteps. Other times it was laughter, a low, guttural chuckle that echoed faintly through floorboards, too soft for anyone else to hear, but close enough to make the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I needed to see who or what was up there. I grabbed a flashlight and crept to the stairs, each step creaking under my weight. My apartment's door closed behind me with a soft click, and the sound of it seemed unnaturally loud in the dark corridor. The hallway was narrow, suffocating. The air smelled of mildew and something metallic. I reached the apartment above me, Unit 3B. Its door was shut, but faint light seeped through the cracks around the frame. The footsteps stopped the instant I stood outside. A silence, so complete it pressed against my ears. I knocked softly. "Hello?" My voice sounded small, almost laughable. No answer. I tried the doorknob. Locked. Of course. I could hear movement inside now, behind the door. Shuffling, dragging, whispering. And then distinctly, a voice low and calm. "You shouldn't be here." I froze, my pulse hammering. I live below you," I said, trying to sound casual, though my hand shook. The voice cut me off. "You shouldn't have moved in." That was it. Just those words, soft but heavy with certainty, spoken as though they had been waiting decades for me to arrive. Then silence again. I stumbled back to my apartment, shaking. I tried to convince myself it was a prank, some eccentric neighbor with a taste for theatrics. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. That voice had a weight, an authority, a presence that couldn't be faked. I started noticing other things in my apartment afterward. Shadows at the corner of my vision, always retreating when I looked directly at them. Whispers through the vents, murmuring words I couldn't quite catch. Objects moved slightly from one day to the next. A book, a mug, a shoe I was certain I hadn't left in that spot. One evening, I found scratches on my bedroom ceiling. Thin, shallow marks, like fingernails dragging across the plaster. Above them, a faint outline of a face, almost like a shadow pressed flat against the floor of the apartment above. I couldn't tell if I was imagining it, but my heart told me otherwise. Then came the day I heard the crying. Not a child, not human. Something inhuman, raw and guttural, almost like the walls themselves were in pain. It came through the ceiling in long, drawn-out wails, echoing into every corner of my apartment. I pressed my hands to my ears, but it didn't stop. I felt it in my chest, shaking my ribcage, rattling my bones. I called the manager again. "There's something wrong upstairs. Someone or something is..." Mrs. Langley? She's fine, he interrupted sharply. You're imagining things. People get lonely up there, that's all. His voice didn't convince me. I stopped sleeping altogether. The noises, the scratches, the voice, the crying, they didn't stop. They didn't fade. And then one night I saw her. I woke to the sound of the doorbell. No one ever rings the bell this late, ever. I crept to the peephole, heart hammering. No one, just the hallway, empty and still. And then I noticed it. A pair of eyes, pale and cold, staring at me from the apartment across the hall. Not from inside a window, but from the darkness itself. They were unblinking, and the moment our eyes met, the footsteps above me started again, dragging slowly, deliberately, as if celebrating my recognition. I ran back to my apartment and barricaded the door. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't think straight. I started documenting everything. Every sound, every movement, every shadow. I even began recording at night, hoping to catch something tangible. And that's when I saw it. I rewound the footage from last night. At first, nothing, just the empty apartment, the faint light of my bedside lamp flickering. Then, slowly, a figure emerged on the ceiling, thin, elongated, its limbs bending at impossible angles. It crawled along the plaster like water running up a wall. And then it stopped, its head tilted down, and the camera captured something impossible. The face of a woman, pale, hollow-eyed, mouth stretched in a silent scream. And written across her forehead, almost carved into the flesh, were the words, "You are next." I dropped the camera. My hand shook uncontrollably. I wanted to leave, to run, but something stopped me. A whisper in my ear, soft, almost affectionate, like a lullaby. "You can't leave." I turned, heart pounding. No one was there. And then I realized the truth. I'd been hearing the footsteps, the dragging, the whispers for years, just not in my apartment. I had moved into her apartment. The one above was not occupied by a neighbor. It was a memory, a presence, trapped. And now, I was an intruder in her space, in her existence. The building is old. I've read that parts of it date back over 100 years. Apartments have been swapped, walls moved, floors replaced. The things that live here, they don't care about walls or doors or what humans call private property. They wait, they mark their territory. And sometimes when someone new moves in, they remind you, you're not the one in control. I can hear her now, pacing above me, always pacing. I can feel her in the shadows of the hall, the brush of her fingers along the walls. I haven't left my apartment in days. I barely move. I live in terror of her, and yet I cannot bring myself to leave, because I know that when I do, when I finally step outside, she will move in. And this time, I won't be able to hear her footsteps above. I am the apartment now.